currently remains standing as we administer the voting. I, Elementary say, is solemnly swear that my testimony that I've come to give the charity of Liberia is the truth and nothing but the truth. The open document. Want to formally welcome you to this session of the Liberia'S Magic of Experience. Ms. Here, we want to thank you very much for honoring the invitation of the Commission to come and share your experience and perspectives with the Commission and the people of Liberia. We realize you have a very tight and hectic schedule, but I was standing for managing to find time to come to the Commission with these decisions for the purpose of making their contribution to the process of soul searching of our nation and finding the basis for national records and peace. For us, as a Commission, we feel it is a big direction undertaking of all Liberians to support this process, which is meant to lay the foundation for future progress of our nation, and at the same time, find a way out of our situation so that reconciliation can be an enduring process for our country. We thank you for the support you've given to the process, which is one of manifested by your presence. As a Commission, we felt that our investigation would be incomplete if we do not speak, if we do not hear, we don't give the opportunity to persons, Nigerians who have been around during the 2 years, 79, 2003, who have the clear knowledge about what transpired in that period, who have made contributions or who participated in one way or another as activists of our life. We realize that in the 70s, we can stand, observe a few moments of silent prayer. And in that moment, let us please remember those who lost their lives during our turbulent period. Our eyes will currently remain standing as we administer the vote. I, Elementary say, because solemnly swear that my testimony that I've come to give the charity of Liberia is the truth and nothing but the truth. The open document. Want to formally welcome you to this session of the Liberia'S Magic of Experience. Ms. Here, we want to thank you very much for honoring the invitation of the Commission to come and share your experience and perspectives with the Commission and the people of Liberia. We realize you have a very tight and hectic schedule, but I was standing for managing to find time to come to the commission because of these decisions for the purpose of making their contribution to the process of soul searching of our nations and finding the basis for national records for NP. For us, as a commission, we feel it is its directive undertaking of all Liberians to support this process, which is then to lay the foundation for future progress of our nation, and at the same time find a way out of our situation so that reconciliation can be an enduring process by the government. We thank you for the support you gave into the process, which want to manifest that by your presence. At the commission, we felt that our investigation would be incomplete if we do not speak, if we do not hear, we don't give the opportunity to persons, Nigerians who have been around during the period of 79, 2003, who have bacterial knowledge about what transpired in that period, who have made contributions, who participated in one way or another, activities or otherwise. We realized that in the 70s, leading up to 1979, we were a public official. But then after the military coup, we became an other different process. Several times we were being tried for reasons. And then our country progressed on 1995 up to 1990, when there was a fever uprising results of the war. All of that eventually there have been a lot said about government for that period of 1995. And then eventually participated in legislation elections, and then the subsequent elections which helped us to survive. Against that background, the commission felt it would be very useful for the process for us to hear something from us. This is the opportunity to share their expectations of the rest of the district and our country taken for one year of our country. For example, what the city did by that purpose. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, part of the welcome. I will take this time to just really looking for the recently to introduce commissioners to their president. Yeah, I did commissioners, others are not clear for previously on I was not sure. But now then this is a check after my comment. That's the thing which commissioner of the that. Actually, were immediate at my left, and immediately at my right is the first brown room. I actually the room is very good. Now, Dr. Evans, that I think thank you very much. One of the things we want to move to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. I said I would be here. Not here. Allow me to start with a little bit of discussion. I grew up in a family that represented the diversity of the nation, the good and the bad, you might say. My grandmother, my mother's mother, came from Sino-Town. That's where my mother was born. She was a illiterate who had never come to work with her. My mother grew up there until such time that she was taken by a family in Monrovia, the John Mark family, and where she was raised. And the reason she was taken is that my grandmother was married in a traditional way to a German merchant. So she was very thick and looked very much like a white person. And so she was that attracted her to many families in Monrovia. She was finally taken by my family. And my grandmother allowed her to come to Monrovia so she would be able to get an education. My father was a jeweler. His father was Chief Jamari, a very renowned jeweler chief. His name was also changed from Jamari to Johnson because of the interaction of Chief Jamari with Elijah Johnson and all of those. But my grandmother, my father's mother, was also in the literature. Was a jeweler. He never came to Monrovia. And so my father also was brought to Monrovia to live in a family, the Mosaic family, where he lived and became a printed that role. So in our family, like I said, we practiced that friendship. We had two grandmothers that until they died, they could not live a life. They need property, they need segregation. But I also had mother and father that grew up in a religious atmosphere in Western education, so you might say that they passed. And so they knew the good life that came from what was then called Congo people. But I'm glad that we never forgot our roots. We spent a lot of time with the village, being to our village with our regional village that we go to even today, with our illiterate older grandmothers. And our illiterate few grandmothers spent a lot of time with us in Monrovia. And as a result, they being the old have a different perspective of who we are and what like you are working. I then, you might say my activism started in 1955, which was the year I graduated from the Culture for Graduate. That was the year when there was the government and the executive mansion was there. The old mansion on National Street, a little bit up the hill from there. And during the attempted school, the soldiers were all in the street. And many of us then came out and had to go into the office to watch the film. And that's what film in the Getty Road. Actually, it's two again, but we ended up with David Coleman saying the one that was the village part. I remember until this day a photograph in a local newspaper that read, from this to this. And from this was David Coleman in a suit with a top hat. So this, it's widowed body in a hijab. I got married right after high school. And so activism for me came to an end, except these things that were implanted upon my mind. And it wasn't until four children later when I went back to school, to college. It did not come back into, you may call it professional political life, until I returned to after college and went to work for what was then the Department of the Treasury. It was in 1964. I was merely a junior professional. I worked on a junior leagues. And in 1969 was the first time you may say that I spoke out against what was going on in society. This was a development conference at the University of Liberia that was programmed by what was then the Howard University team that was working with our Minister of Planning and Economic Affairs. And I represented the Department of Treasury at that conference. And I made certain statements about the politics of government. and why changes was necessary in the society. It was felt that I would get in trouble as a result of what I said. And Dr. Papanek, the head of the other team, then quickly arranged for me to leave the country and to go to Harvard for graduate study. One might say that a lot of activism came at Harvard because at that time there was a protest against the Vietnam War. And I happened to have joined some of the protests, though I was not American, and had no problem with the Vietnamese or the Americans, but joined it anyway because it was an exciting thing to do. After my completion, I returned home in 1971. President Truman had died, and President Obama had taken over, and the Minister of Finance, to which I was returning, then called the Minister of Finance, which Stephen Colbert as the minister. I worked then in 1972. I gave the famous vis-a-vis speech when I spoke as a convention address, my alma mater. And that speech pointed out what I said was the serious distortions in our society and in our politics. That the great divide that we have faced in our country still existed. That resources were not used to unify the people. In any case, many will remember, and that's speech is available today, that in 72, we are predicted to do such, which finally came in 1980. That speech got me into problems with the former government. And ultimately, I had to leave. In 1973, I left the government and went, you might say, to exile, but with a job at the World Bank. And I stayed at the bank until 1977. During that year, I was not involved in the activism, but this is my professional life. In 1977, Steve Colbert had died, and Jim Phillips had taken over as the Minister of Finance. He was able to pursue the bank, then able to come back home. Of course, we had, during that period, was the preparation of the OEU conference, and of course, in 1979, was the infamous race riot. After the riot, I was one of those who served on the Brownell Commission that made certain recommendations to government, and I have copies of the Brownell Commission's report, which I will look at the other screen for you, in which we made certain recommendations to the government about trying to change the political situation. As you may know, those recommendations were not respected. But ultimately, Minister Phillips was, in a way, held responsible. President Colbert asked me to explain in August of 1979 the position of Minister of Finance, which I held until the April 1980. I was removed from the position, but I was one of the 4 ministers that were saved by the PRC. So, it's Brian, who was then the Minister of Health, Social Welfare, Gilbert Tucker, who was then the Minister of Public Works, and Cindy Gunso, who was then the Minister of Rural Development. And I can't see why we were saved, except the perception of those of the coup makers who may have thought we were not the aggressors. In any case, I was one of those who felt that the change that had come, that we in a way had brought it on ourselves, thought of our failure that made those changes in society over all the many years. And so I took a position in the Dole government, or I was served as the president of the Liberian Development Bank. There were many of the old order who thought that because I took a position in the Dole government, and because in a way we endorsed the Dole government, that we were part of the coup makers, and that we knew of the coup that was far in the future. Did not know it, did not know any of it. But again, like I say, many of us felt that it was time to deposit it. And I then, at the end of 1970, after the coup, 1980, sorry, at the end of 1980, after the coup, it was clear, even though I took a position in working, that many of us were saying that part of the world order. And so we were always confronted with, these old people, the old people in the state in the government, they were not something. And so at the end of 1980, because I was on secondment from the World Bank, I asked the bank to ask the government to release me back to the service of the bank, which they did. And I went back to Washington. And the following year, of course, I went to work with the Citibank in Nairobi. I stayed there until the fall for general elections in '85. And I was, by many of my colleagues to forming a party because then in Liberia some party. And so I came and we did form the party. As many we know, the party was not allowed to be registered. I then left the country in July of '85, and I was invited to go and speak at the Union of Association of Liberian Association of Europe in the United States. And the person who happened to have been president of the union at that time was from Louis. And so I went and spoke in Philadelphia, where the meeting was held. And again, it was a pretty tough speech in which, having come to Liberia back and forth in its new government and having seen what I consider to be the deterioration in what was happening in the country with so many of the PRC members having been killed, with what happened with the executive students, etc. I took a pretty tough position in that statement also. And when I returned, I was put on a house arrest. I was told the details of that you can get if you want. I was called before President Bill and others. Subsequently, when Justice Minister, the principal at the time, taken on a house arrest where I stayed for a while, and because there was some interaction with the public, I finally ended up being taken from my home on a house arrest and was then taken to post country.
Can we make you just the facts of control?
And then Washington to post country, and I happened to have been there with quite a few different people. We stayed in there for about a couple months. I was charged with additional taking me to a military tribunal, where after this proceeding to declared guilty, sentenced to 10 years as partly. When I went down, of course, there was a lot of attention. So there was a political proceeding. There, it's a special person, special that and one was impression how fun they wanted to be present. And I came out. There were 10 of us for them to denounce and to believe that I protected and you connected that. And so I did volunteer to say it. So then that presidential candidate was elected bill with the view of goodness and protect the president candidate. And we went and campaigned very heavily. We didn't have one invention, but the decision itself did not accept that. And then there was the female class who was at the public invention. I think it was the 85. And again, there was huge concern that where you such, you're such female classes, I think it's trying to get some transportation and people like us when we were young. And was very clear with them. Each was saying that and everything to them. I don't think they were ever able to give some kind that they were trying to get transportation out from these people. And so, and we at that time were still engaged in trying to change out the excessive percentage of the negative population. And so one of the other things when everyone saw that the group of people, it's a pretty big time of the eye, even they could we see more time that you know what happened, things that of course I we all live through the two things. And so we all I got it pretty good and people like to know. In the system, taking the military base, they were all taken from the cell. They were both shot like a minute doing that. They were built and they were doing that. And it's a whole episode on I was taking there and we should come out and do things, but I think what happened, I eventually was taken from there, taken to Centerville, where many of the political officials were in there, listening in the Central prison for Centerville. We were all then released in the state. Now I went back, I went to make up. Many people know that during the period of the president, the fellow was overstaying good. There is a lot of the data that led to different things at different reasons. You know, think this whole you the help of your friends, I was able to get out. And it was in the United States. It started in the century with the Muslims. The function of the check and that's when we saw the association of opposition of number different ACDL. And it actively started the political cancer the expectations of the whole government and the need for political shift. This effort culminated in the conference in the room. And at that time, during the experience, I was in touch with Tony because Tony was the leader of President of the Pandula. And in fact, he just the conference against the people. At the time, there was a hearing in the U.S. Congress, and he testified on my behalf at the U.S. Congress. And in that respect, to the ACDL, and we did often have groups to relationship. And we went to Banjo, well, one of the things that's available. The HCBL, only used is a totally different group. Only used was a part of the FEMA group in PFF. And he introduced the scale of rebellion living upon in ACDM. There was some who agreed with it, who agreed that a rebellion was necessary. I will admit to you that I was one of those who did agree that a rebellion was necessary. I was so I didn't have agreed with others. There were others like Ezekiel Fajibu, the Patrick Sale, who are members of the ACDM, Dr. Sawyer, who may have disagreed that a rebellion was necessary. And and so we started to say, well, let's see what it is. But I was never a member of the NCPFL. Absolutely not. What I did do was to meet at certain requests with Mr. Taylor. In times when I went for a meeting there, he brought him there to learn to meet with him. And they went through and so they were people who wanted to rebellion. That's why wanted to talk for breakfast that would be sold the money that you spent for breakfast, give us the money. And so the communication with them continued. Intelligence went out once to be able to assess the situation. And so when I assumed what was a sea rebellion, what was something I was doing. It seemed like I could was much that it's all that's a wonderful thing. Trying to make something but did not have the capacity. The junior golden said, he may have been removed, but he did not have been removed easily. The new things when the rebellion started in December we knew about it, we heard about it. At this point, I also was interested in people on the State Department of the U.S. because they were also delivering the videos of what they were. And so they were also interested in feeding me with information, taking information in them, knowing what was happening. We thought it was a general rebellion, and it started also these what we just said that it's sequence moving. Because that together there is a second non-specific. Elmer Johnson, he came out to join the rebellion, but also maybe to know what he was doing. And when he was coming out, he did tell us that he was coming out to join the freedom. And that he was bringing his military team, he had been in New York Committee to say if it was still from December. He said, I'm restoring the nation. Elmer was supposed to go. And was speaking with exactly the other two, we had the opportunity to people about ensuring their safety, thinking that we can't even honest, they were thinking that we didn't honest, we didn't. Perfectly experience. And so, when I looked at that, so other things, so it's like the same thing, the ways, the influence, and things, and that's what we then because there's nothing about the money. We, ACDL, or ACDL, was going to the business leaders would let us. So, soliciting 10,000 dollars. And that's what it is. And so the Taylor was the first that we were there standing with fathers and running out and speaking materially and the miners and set up the names of whom was it to be to bring the over the ground. The whole thing started to do, that's what they started what is really thing to breast. What we saw was the two things use and the use into the use of the RAH and the problem what happened. What they do is just intervene, what we not intervene, or what our expectations was based on what we what for the thing. In the year, and so decided I was going to do what is the challenge in the that's what it is. The British journalists were also there. What is it? So recently, I think one of the dear thoughts because I exactly like the computer right up here. The year is recently for the body. And so we did go to the Valentine's Day, brilliant time, the full day. The really shut the look and then you just be home and after a few hours, they said, so you can do it. But not the little thing, by this time in York, the middle system. And one is when I went to the with a couple of medallions, right? Other times the face of it, and they react really nice to the table is clean, down to power, but to the world, and all of those things are going to trouble later as well, really sort of keep them set. People do the and after that, the news was application. Very sorry. I can't tell you the exact date, but it was before the invasion. We probably was before December 1981.
On that. Will you and others, including some witnesses who have appeared before the commission, said that Tito saw the Banjul conference after betrayal and an attempt to undermine his efforts, and that was the main reason why he did not attend any of the subsequent conferences and he refused to join the interim government at the time. And one of the reasons to refer to is the letter Commissioner Blue tries to Abuto, that letter written earlier at the time had suggested that because he was at a point of it. Okay, the point I'm trying to get to is that Taylor's refusal to join the peace program, the interim government, was because he thought Banjul was intended of speech.
I can say that I told you what I was told. That Little Louise said, we know in certain terms. We hear that there's going to be the landing of an African force. If that force lands, we will consider this that they are going for war, in which case we are not going to participate in peace talks. That was what they said, and that was what I went by. Anything else about betrayal and whatnot, I do not know. My refusal to join the interim government had nothing to do with the position of the NPFL. It had to do with differences in Banjul. And those particular differences came, quite frankly, between our good friend Barentine. But the details that he will.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, President of the Republic of Liberia. We want to thank you very much for taking valuable time of your valuable schedule to come and support this process. We have just ended your testimony now. But before you leave, is there a final word you want to leave the Commission with and the people of Liberia who will be hearing these proceedings in subsequent broadcasts?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that I was part of the group that endorsed the idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because we truly believe, and I still believe, that the first step toward healing our nation's wounds is a process of contrition and forgiveness. You started that process. It hasn't been as smooth or as good as we have wanted it. Some people have been truthful and conformed to the requirements of what we expected. To accuse wrongly, to tell untruths, and to try to take away from what would really be the process of true reconciliation. I hope that as you go through all of it, you will help us to be able to find the real truth based on the documents that you will have before you, based upon the testimonies and the consistencies as you try to go through all of them to see where there have been those who have taken away from the process. And that the end result that you will give us will be a first major step toward true reconciliation, so that we can, at some point, put behind us this divide that has plagued our country from the time of its beginnings. Because without that, we are not going to be able to have the sustainable growth and development that we all seek, until everybody in this country feels like they are a true stakeholder, that they have access to the same kind of opportunity and social justice as the other one. We'll never achieve our development goals, no matter how strong our economy or how good quality the leadership. So I look to you to help us in that regard as we move to the next step. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President.